Hi, Otto here for Bavarian Autosport. Today we're going to be replacing a valve cover gasket on an M54 six-cylinder engine. This will be applicable to most six-cylinder engines from the early 90s up through the late 2000s. This would include the M50, M52, S50, S52, M54, and S54 engines with some modifications. The procedures will be basically the same for all of these engines. You'll have some different access issues, such as the air inlet tray for the climate control system. This one, we're going to remove the washer bottle for clearance, and a couple other little things there, but the procedure on the engine will be the same. The Bentley repair manual will give you the details for your model specifically. With that, let's get going with this. As you're watching the video, don't forget to get comments in if you have questions or thoughts, and hit your like button if you like what you're seeing. Let's get to work now. Okay, here we are at our vehicle. This particular vehicle is a 2002 X5 with the 3-liter. As we noted in the opening, there's a few differences in accessing the valve cover gasket on the different models. On the 3 and 5 series models, or a Z model, this cowl area here will be much lower to the engine, and in order to remove the valve cover, it needs to be removed from the vehicle, and it's easy to do. You can check the Bentley repair manual for the procedures on a specific model. On this X5, we have plenty of clearance here, so we don't have to remove that. We're going to remove the air intake duct here. This would be unique to the X5, so that we can just access the valve cover better. And we're going to remove the washer tank so we can work down to the valve cover as well. So let's take care of that right now. First, we'll take care of putting on a pair of the safe grip gloves. Keep our hands from being all nasty. And these are available on our website at bavauto.com. We'll set those aside. Now, to remove this duct, we have the typical BMW push rivets. Normally we'd use our plastic pry tools to remove these, but these are recessed and the tool can't get in there so well. So we'll use a pair of diagonal cutters and just grip the head and pull up. And there we go. We pull the center out of the rivet, which releases it and pulls it out. There we go, there's all four. We'll use this 10mm socket and ratchet over here on the washer tank. We'll set that aside. Lift the duct up, and there we go. Okay, now we're going to prepare to remove the washer reservoir. Now this reservoir has fluid in it. We could simply pull the two pump motors. We have the main motor here for the windshield and the one back here for the headlights, and our sensor down here. The sensor, we can pull the electrical off and leave the sensor in the tank. That's no problem. The rest of them, if we just pull the motors out, it's going to drain the fluid, although that's the easiest way to remove the tank. If we pull the hose off, we'll drain fluid anyway through the pump. So what we're going to do is remove the fluid from the tank. If you prefer just to drain the fluid on the ground, you can certainly do that as well. Now for this, we are going to use our vacuum fluid extractor. We'll just stick the hose in the tank down to the low section, pump, and remove the fluid. Okay, now the fluid is all the way down to the bottom of the sump here. It's well below the two pumps. We'll just get our extractor out of the way. Okay, now we're ready to remove the tank. We'll pull the pump motor out of the housing, up out of the grommet, and just let it sit aside. Behind here is the headlight washer pump. Same thing, just pull it out and set it aside. This one looks like we'll have to do our final removal once the tank is loose. We've already removed the electrical connector from the sensor. We have two nuts. These are 10mm. We'll lift up and pull it aside here, get rid of all these pumps. This also has the pump for the rear wiper. We'll pull them loose from the tank. There's the mounting positions for the two rear pumps. They just push into these brackets and push down in the grommets. Same thing for the main pump here. And this is our fluid level sensor. Now we'll just keep these connected and set out of the way. And we'll just reinstall them when we're done with the job. Now we're actually ready to start into the valve cover. Okay, now we've got our area clear. We're ready to remove the trim covers so we can access the actual valve cover. This is the front of the actual valve cover. We'll pull the oil cap off and set it aside and pop these little trim caps. If you lose these or yours are already missing, or you break the small little plastic tabs, we have these available on our website. Very common replacement item. They tend to break or get lost. So we'll pry all four up. All four of these are the same. And again, 10 millimeters down here. Loosen all. And on our last bolt here, this one is a bolt. These two are bolts, these two are nuts. Now we can pull the covers up. Like that. We'll set that aside. Pull this one. And before we're finished, we'll put the oil cap back on just to be sure we don't drop anything down. So we'll get rid of these covers. Then we'll come back and take care of the valve cover itself. All right, now our next step here in removing our valve cover to replace the gaskets is to remove the coils. You may notice this one coil looks different. Somewhere along the life of this vehicle, this one coil was replaced, probably due to a misfire on this cylinder and a faulty coil. No big deal, we'll just put it back in the same hole when we put things back together. So we have 10 millimeter bolts, 2 for each coil. We'll remove all the bolts, pull the clips up like this to pull the harnesses off, each one, then the coil can come out. We'll just do this one first since we're right here and it's easy to see. There's one bolt. Some models, instead of bolts, will have studs in the cylinder head, and we'll just have nuts on top of the coil mounting brackets. And finally, later models, this is a 2002, most 2003 and later with the M engines, the coils are not bolted down at all. They simply push down on top of the spark plugs and are held in place with basically rubber snaps. We have a video showing those. If you search the blog site with DIY coils, you'll find a video showing how to remove those coils and how to reinstall them. Here's our coil with the boot. We'll set that aside and do the same thing with the other 5 coils. Then we'll be ready to start removing the valve cover. Now that we have our coils out right up here, kept them in order from 1 through 6, we're ready to start actually loosening the valve cover bolts. Now we'll loosen them in a general crisscross expanding outward or spiral pattern. In other words, something like here, 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 around like this, spiraling outward. The exact order really doesn't matter. We just want to relieve the tension on the valve cover evenly from the middle outward. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Can't remember if there's one in the back. I don't think there is. And through the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Note this capacitor here. We'll have to take that off separately. There's a ground wire here and our 2 grounds here. We'll just watch for those, keep track of them, put them back in the proper place. And we'll remove the crankcase ventilation hose here, pinching the lock to release the lock tabs. And we'll pry a little bit just in this gap right here between the hose and the nipple. Push it off. Notice the moisture that came out of there. There's a lot of condensation, and looking inside, this is condensation and oil mixed together. This is what happens when moisture gets into the oil. That's a good indicator that we may need to replace the crankcase ventilation oil separator and check valve. We may have clogging in the valve and it's not venting properly. So we need to keep mindful of that. That may be the next job we do on this vehicle. I'll bet that the underside of the valve cover may look like that as well. So we'll set this screwdriver aside and start to get these bolts. And let's start over here. I'm going to loosen all of them as we go around, and then I'll physically finish unscrewing and removing them. Okay, and here we have our last nut assembly. Now note, we've got a nut. This one has the stud on the top because we had the ground wire attached. But we've got the nut, a washer, and our rubber seal. These rubber seals we're also going to want to replace along with the valve cover gasket, so those are fresh as well. Now, we're just about ready to pull the valve cover off. We've got the coil wiring harness here. This is held in place on this model with just a couple small snaps here. And we can lift it out just like that and basically just set it out of our way. Now we have these connectors here are for the oxygen sensor wires. Here's a little rubber guide. We'll set that aside, watch for where that goes later. And we'll just pull these out of the brackets and set them aside so they're not in the way of removing the valve cover. Pull all the vacuum hose on the secondary air check valve and check the section right here. This is often deteriorated. Now's a good time to put a new section of hose on. This one has already been replaced. And you'll note these harnesses go around the back of the valve cover in a little trough. We'll just make sure they're free so that we can pull them aside. And also that vacuum line for the secondary air, this plastic right here. All right, those are all free. We've got all of our nuts free. We've got the crankcase ventilation hose free. We're ready to remove the valve cover now. It might just pull right up. There we go. Or we might have needed to do a little bit of prying, but be careful. This cover is plastic. Don't do a lot of heavy prying on it. We'll lift, pull it out, and here's all that yellow goo, let's call it, from condensation in the crankcase. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll clean that up. And again, we'll plan to do the crankcase ventilation valve at a later date. We'll note here, our actual gasket is right here. and you can see it's cracking apart. It's hardened. It's got this piece that fits down in a groove down here, and each spark plug hole has a gasket on it. You can see this one stayed behind on the cylinder head. All the rest of them are on the valve cover. These are actually all three together in one piece with these connectors. You can see that this is rubber in the beginning and it's all hardened plastic now. So we'll peel all of those off, clean the areas, peel out the valve cover gasket, make sure the trough is clean, and then we will prep the cylinder head along all of the edges. We'll clean all of the edges with brake parts cleaner. Here's that one errant spark plug seal. Clean everything up and we'll be ready to go back together.